In a vast and ancient forest where the trees were so tall they seemed to hold up the ceiling of the sky, there existed a hidden sanctuary known as the Whispering Grove, where the winds always blew with a gentle, cooling touch, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves like liquid emeralds. In this peaceful kingdom lived a group of friends who were as different as the colors of a sunset, but as united as the roots of the great oaks that anchored their world. There was a pure white dove named Serena, whose wings felt like soft velvet, and whose cooing was a rhythmic melody that could soothe the most turbulent heart, and a coal-black crow named Corvus, whose feathers shimmered with an oil-slick purple and whose eyes held the wisdom of 1,000 forgotten secrets. Beside them lived a vibrant green parrot named Kiki, whose voice was a kaleidoscope of every sound in the forest, and a wise old owl named Hoot, who sat in the hollow of a silver birch, observing the slow rotation of the stars. The mental pain. The outside world, where birds fought for territory and scavenged for scraps, was a distant memory for these friends, because they had discovered that the true wealth of the forest was not in the abundance of seeds, but in the depth of their connection and the peace of their shared silence. They spent their days moving through the high canopies in a synchronized dance of flight, where the dove provided the grace, and the crow provided the strategy, and the parrot provided the joy that kept their spirits light, even when the heavy clouds of a storm gathered on the horizon. Serena the dove was the heart of the group, and she often spoke in a soft, fluttering language about the importance of the internal sanctuary, telling her friends that the sky was not a place to be conquered but a space to be embraced. The mental pain of anxiety, which often plagued the smaller birds of the woods, never reached the Whispering Grove because the friends had created a protective circle of trust that functioned like an invisible shield against the stresses of the wild. Corvus the crow was the guardian of the history, and he would tell long wandering stories about the ancestors of the birds who had once flown across the great oceans to find this place of rest. And his voice was a low, resonant hum that acted as a natural sedative for the younger. The story of their friendship was a long and winding path that led through the Valley of Echoes and over the peaks of the morning mist, where they had faced the challenges of the changing seasons with a collective courage that made them unbreakable. Kiki the parrot would often mimic the sound of a falling rain or a rustling stream, creating a soundscape of relaxation that allowed the other birds to drift into a deep sleep, even during the brightest hours of the noon. They realized that the unique power of their bond was that it allowed each bird to be exactly what they were, without the pressure to change or the fear of being judged for their differences. The crow didn't need to be white like the dove, and the parrot didn't need to be silent like the owl, because they understood that the forest needed every vibration and every color to be complete. The mental pain of loneliness was a ghost that had been chased away by the constant presence of a friend who understood the rhythm of your wings and the depth of your silence. As the sun began to dip below the horizon of the great forest, the friends would gather on the branches of the ancient mother tree, whose bark was soft and scented with pine, and they would begin the ritual of the evening calm. Serena would lead them in a series of slow breaths that matched the swaying of the branches, and Corvus would recount the events of the day in a way that turned every struggle into a lesson and every joy into a treasure. The parrot Kiki would soften her vibrant tones into a low and rhythmic murmur that sounded like the distant hum of the universe. and the old owl Hoot would open his large golden eyes to watch over them as they began to surrender to the night. The unique beauty of this story was that it never truly ended, but simply shifted into a deeper and more peaceful dimension as the moon rose to cast a silver net over the grove. The mental pain of the past was being washed away by the cooling currents of the night air, and the friends felt their bodies becoming heavy and relaxed as if they were being cradled by the very arms of the forest itself. They were a family of the sky, anchored by the love of the earth, and as they closed their eyes, the story of the dove and the crow and the parrot became a living prayer for the peace of every living creature. Gemini said the soft emerald canopy of the Whispering Grove began to deepen into a rich velvet indigo as the sun dipped its fiery head below the edge of the world, and the birds felt the cooling breath of the night rising from the damp, mossy floor to kiss their feathers with a gentle silver mist. Serena, the white dove, tucked her head beneath a wing that smelled of sun-warmed pine and wild lavender, feeling the rhythmic pulse of the mother tree beneath her talons as it hummed a low vibration of ancient earth magic that traveled through the bark and into the very bones of the forest dwellers. Corvus, the black crow, sat on the branch just above her, his dark plumage absorbing the fading light until he looked like a shadow carved from the night itself. And he began to speak in a voice that was like the slow grinding of smooth river stones. A sound so grounding and so heavy that it acted as an anchor for the wandering thoughts of the smaller birds. He told them of the great migration of the spirit, a journey not of miles, but of moments, where a bird must learn to fly inward to find the star that never sets, and the peace that never withers regardless of the storms that howl in the external world. The mental pain of the day, the tiny worries about the next meal, or the height of the hawk, or the strength of the wind, began to dissolve like salt in a deep blue sea, as Kiki the Parrot slowed the rapid clicking of her beak and began to whistle, a low fluting note that mimicked the sound of a distant waterfall. This sound was a trick of the breath, a secret passed down through generations of tropical ancestors who knew that the sound of falling water could wash the mind clean of all its jagged edges and sharp fears. As the forest grew darker, the other friends of the grove began to settle into their respective nooks and hollows, including the tiny goldfinches, who looked like sleeping sunbeams, and the red-breasted robins, who carried the memory of the dawn in their chests. They all listened as Hoot, the wise owl, opened his wings in a silent stretch that spanned the width of the clearing, and began to describe the geography of the dream realm, a place where the trees were made of starlight and the rivers were made of liquid silver moonbeams. The unique power of this gathering was that the birds were no longer separate creatures with separate lives, but had become a single, breathing organism, a collective heart that beat in time with the rotation of the planets. The mental pain of loneliness, which often haunts those who fly too high or too fast, was completely absent from the Whispering Grove, because every rustle of a leaf and every snap of a twig was a shared experience, a communal vibration that reassured every soul that it was seen and loved. Corvus described the hidden valley of the blue lilies, where the flowers only bloomed under the light of a full moon, and where the scent was so intoxicatingly peaceful that any bird who flew over it would instantly forget the weight of their own wings. He spoke of the great silence that lives at the center of every storm, and how the crow and the dove are two sides of the same sky, one representing the mystery of the dark and the other the clarity of the light. As the hours of the night stretched onward, the script of their existence became a long, flowing ribbon of tranquility that wrapped around the mother tree and tied the earth to the stars in a knot of absolute grace. Serena, the dove, felt her heart rate slow to the speed of a falling leaf, and she began to project a soft white light from her spirit that illuminated the faces of her friends with a glow that was warmer than the sun but cooler than the moon. The mental pain of the past years, the memories of cold winters and scarce springs were being overwritten by this one perfect moment of absolute presence, where the only thing that mattered was the warmth of the branch and the steadiness of the breath. Kiki, the parrot, began to murmur the names of all the trees in the forest, a litany of oak and ash and birch and cedar and willow, and the names became a mantra that led the group deeper and deeper into the corridors of a restorative sleep. They were traveling now through the landscapes of the mind, where the clouds were made of soft down feathers, and the sun was a gentle golden lantern that never burned. The story of the dove, the crow, the parrot, and their many feathered friends was becoming a legend of the atmosphere, a song that the wind would carry to every corner of the world, to tell the weary and the broken that there is always a grove waiting for them, if they only know how to listen to the silence. As the midnight hour approached, the whispering grove became a sanctuary of absolute stillness, where even the insects paused their humming to honor the peace of the birds, and the mother tree leaned its heavy branches down to shield them from the wandering eyes of the night. The happy ending was a state of being where the birds knew that when they woke, they would still be together, and that the strength they found in the dark would carry them through the brilliance of the coming day. Corvus gave one final low caw that sounded like a benediction, and then he, too, allowed his eyes to close, joining his friends in the great velvet ocean of the dream. The world outside continued to spin, but inside the grove time had stopped, and the only thing left was the soft, rhythmic sound of 100 tiny hearts beating as one under the watchful gaze of the two moons and the infinite stars. Heminisa, deep midnight of the whispering grove, became a sanctuary of such profound stillness that even the rustle of the leaves seemed to happen in slow motion, as if the trees themselves were afraid to wake the feathered friends huddling together in a mosaic of silver and shadow. Serena, the white dove, felt the warmth of Corvus the crow pressing gently against her side, and in that touch there was a silent language that spoke of 1,000 years of peace and the end of all mental pain, because the light and the dark had finally found a place to rest without conflict. The parrot Kiki began to breathe in a slow, rhythmic cycle that mimicked the swaying of the giant ferns below, and with every exhale she released a tiny, soft murmur that sounded like the bubbling of a hidden spring deep within the earth, where the water is always cool and the secrets are always safe. The mental pain of the long flight through life, the tired muscles and the weary eyes, was being pulled out of their bodies by the gentle gravity of the mother tree, whose roots reached down into the very heart of the planet to anchor their dreams in a soil of absolute security. Corvus the crow began to dream of a sky made of liquid sapphire, where he could fly forever without ever getting tired, and where every caw he uttered turned into a glowing star that stayed fixed in the heavens to guide the others. He saw the parrot Kiki flying beside him, her green feathers turning into emerald flames that didn't burn but instead provided a soft healing light for the smaller birds who were lost in the thickets of their own worries. The wise owl Hoot kept his golden eyes half closed as he watched the silver dew begin to form on the tips of the pine needles, each drop reflecting a different constellation like a tiny crystal ball, holding the future of the forest in its transparent depths. The unique power of this shared sleep was that it created a telepathic bridge between the birds, allowing the dove to feel the strength of the crow and the crow to feel the gentleness of the dove, until there was no longer any difference between the predator and the prey, but only a circle of life that was complete and harmonious. The mental pain of the outside world, noise of the cities, and the rush of the wind could not penetrate this barrier of feathers and trust, because the friends had woven a cocoon of silence that was stronger than any stone wall. As the hours of the early morning began to creep toward the horizon, the forest floor became a carpet of soft white mist that rose up to wrap the trunks of the trees in a cooling embrace, and the scent of damp cedar and crushed mint became so thick it felt like a heavy blanket of comfort. Serena moved her head slightly in her sleep, her beak tucked deep into her chest, and she dreamt of a world where every bird had a branch, and every branch had a song, and the only law was the law of the heartbeat. The parrot Kiki began to whistle a low melody in her sleep, a song of the tropical sun that had been cooled by the mountain snow, and the sound was so beautiful it made the stars twinkle with a renewed brilliance, as if they were dancing to the music of a dreaming bird. The mental pain of the past winters, the memories of the frozen lakes and the empty nests, was being overwritten by the warmth of this communal rest, and the birds felt their spirits expanding until they filled the entire grove and touched the edges of the universe. They were no longer just a dove and a crow and a parrot, but they were the breath of the forest and the pulse of the night and the hope of the coming dawn. The long script of their friendship was a masterpiece of emotional depth, where every chapter was a vow of loyalty and every page was a testament to the power of staying together when the world feels too big and too cold. The happy ending was not a destination but a state of being, where the birds knew that even when they were flying in different directions, they were always connected by the invisible threads of the whispering grove. As the first faint light of the silver dew began to shimmer on the horizon, the friends remained in their deep state of sleep, because they had discovered that the most important work they could ever do was to rest deeply so they could love fiercely. The story of the birds was a living prayer for the peace of the world, a rhythmic and eternal lullaby that would continue to play in the hearts of anyone who was brave enough to close their eyes and listen to the silence of the trees, the deep stillness of the midnight hour in the whispering grove began to vibrate with a new and ethereal energy as the friends entered the collective dream of the golden feather, where the physical forest dissolved into a landscape of pure light, and every wing beat felt like a brushstroke on the canvas of the cosmos. Serena, the white dove, found herself gliding over a river of liquid starlight that mirrored the purity of her own heart, and she saw that the mental pain of the world below was being filtered through the leaves of the celestial trees, turning into a fine silver dust that blessed the earth with the gift of forgetting. Beside her, Corvus, the black crow, soared with a newfound lightness, his dark feathers catching the glint of distant nebulae. And he realized that the heavy secrets he had carried for centuries were actually the anchors that allowed him to stay steady in the currents of the infinite. The Parrot Kiki was no longer a bird of green and gold, but a shimmering spectrum of every color that had ever existed. And as she whistled the melody of the spheres, the sound created ripples of peace that traveled through the dimensions to touch the hearts of every weary soul. The unique power of this dream was that it removed the boundaries between the self and the universe, allowing the birds to feel the growth of the grass and the rotation of the planets as if it were a single, unified movement of a great and loving heart. The mental pain of being small and fragile in a vast and dangerous world was replaced by a profound understanding that they were the essential notes in a grand symphony that would never be complete without their presence. The other friends of the grove, including the tiny finches and the sturdy robins, were now flying in a great spiraling formation that looked like a living constellation of warmth. And they discovered that their voices, when joined together, could silence the noise of an storm. The long script of their journey was being written in the stars themselves, a testament to the truth that friendship is the only medicine that can heal the spirit without leaving a scar. As they moved deeper into the dream, they reached the great nest of the universe, a place made of woven sunbeams and moonlit silk, where every bird, regardless of its color or its song, could find a place of absolute belonging. The unique beauty of this experience was that it didn't end with the waking world, but instead provided a permanent layer of tranquility that the birds would carry back with them into the daylight. The mental pain of the past was being completely neutralized by the overwhelming grace of the golden feather, which appeared in the center of the nest as a symbol of the divine balance between the light and the dark. Serena and Corvus and Kiki and the wise owl Hoot stood around the feather and felt its warmth radiating through their spirits, clearing away the last traces of fear and exhaustion. The happy ending was a state of consciousness where the forest was not just a place to live, but a state of being, and where every breath was a celebration of the miracle of existence. As the dream began to gently fold back into the reality of the Whispering Grove, the birds remained in a state of deep and rhythmic sleep. Their bodies relaxed and their minds clear. The story of the dove and the crow and the parrot was now a permanent part of the forest's atmosphere, a rhythmic and eternal lullaby that would continue to play for anyone who was brave enough to close their eyes and trust the silence. The world outside was beginning to stir with the first faint whispers of the dawn, but inside the grove the peace of the night remained a steady and unwavering flame that would never go out. The deep velvet silence of the Whispering Grove reached its most profound depth as the dream of the golden feather began to expand, stretching across the fabric of the entire universe until every tree in the forest and every star in the sky was vibrating with the same frequency of absolute peace. Serena the white dove felt her spirit grow so light that she was no longer just a bird on a branch, but was the very air that carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp cedar to the furthest corners of the earth. Beside her, Corvus, the black crow, let out a final soft sigh in his sleep, and as he did, the last remaining shadow of mental penda, old memories of cold winters and lonely flights, was transformed into a shimmering black pearl of wisdom that he tucked away into the deep nest of his subconscious. The parrot Kiki began to hum a melody that was so low and so steady, it sounded like the heartbeat of the world itself. A rhythmic lullaby that ensured no heart in the grove would ever beat alone or in fear again. The long script of their journey was now reaching a state of eternal completion, where the story was no longer a series of events, but a permanent state of grace that wrapped around the mother tree like a cloak of woven starlight. The unique power of this final resting place was that it removed the concept of time, allowing the birds to exist in a perpetual moment of now, where the only thing that mattered was the warmth of their feathers and the safety of their brotherhood. The mental pain of the entire forest was being pulled into the roots of the ancient oaks and filtered through the soil until it came out as a sweet, nourishing sap that fed the dreams of the smallest fledglings. Aurelius, the owl, who had watched over them for centuries, finally allowed his large golden eyes to close completely, for he knew that the balance had been restored, and that the dove and the crow and the parrot were now the guardians of their own destiny. The unique beauty of this ending was that it was not a fading away, but a blooming into a higher state of existence, where every bird could fly without effort and sing without a voice and love without a boundary. The Whispering Grove was no longer just a location on a map, but a sanctuary in the mind of every creature who seeks a rest from the noise of the world. The happy ending was a horizon that never turned harsh, and a sun that never scorched, but instead provided a gentle golden glow that felt like a warm embrace. As the friends drifted into the deepest layer of the cosmic sleep, they did so as a single entity, a trinity of peace, represented by the white, the black, and the green. The story of the dove, the crow, and the parrot was now a living prayer for the rest of the world, a rhythmic and eternal song that would continue to play in the silence of the trees for 1,000 generations. The mental pain was gone. The heavy wings were light, and the forest was finally and completely at home in the cradle of the night. As the 3-hour journey of their souls reached its final vibration, the stars above the grove performed a slow dance of celebration, and the moon cast a single long beam of silver light across the mother tree as a final seal of protection. The world outside continued to move, but inside the grove, there was only the steady breathing of 100 tiny hearts finding their perfect rest. The story was ended, but the peace was infinite, a steady and unwavering flame that would never go out as long as there were stars in the sky and dreams in the hearts of the birds. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your night. May you find deep peace and restful sleep. Wishing you the sweetest dreams. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.